another episode of the Square and Compass podcast. This time, um, I'm very excited to have Beatriz Villarroel. She's a postdoctoral researcher. She's with the Galileo Project, which I'm excited to talk to her about. She's out searching for potentially missing stars, or we don't know exactly what they are, but things that have gone missing in the sky. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
The reason I try to have scientists and researchers on the podcast, even though it's a Masonic podcast, is because Freemasons are always encouraged for things like lifelong learning and the liberal arts and sciences. What is it that got you yourself interested in exploring the universe, astronomy, and just space and searching for well, in the case of the Galileo Project, right, searching for extraterrestrial artifacts, and just what is it about the universe that excites you so much?
Well, actually, I didn't start off as an astronomer. I started off in molecular biology long time ago. And I was, I really enjoyed molecular biology as well. But then as I kept thinking and I kept being curious, at first I was very curious about how can like proteins fold so instantaneously into always the same shapes. I was very stuck. And then somehow I started getting interested into galaxy evolution. And that drove me away from molecular biology on my 4th year of my studies into astronomy. So it hasn't been always a clear path. I'm a very curious person and I always ask more and more questions. And once I start thinking about something, I have to solve it before I can move on. And naturally, like I've been asking questions about life, if there's life out there, if there's any intelligent life, it kind of emerged as a consequence of always asking myself new and new questions. And I think it's one of the most important things, most important questions to answer if there's any intelligent civilization other than us humans.
You are involved with, a few different projects, but one of them that I think you're well known for is the VASCO Project. So can you tell us about what that project is and what you're looking for with that project?
So the VASCO Project is the Vanishing and Appearing Sources During a Century of Observations project, which is my main project, where we are looking for things that might have vanished from our sky. And the goal is to find really exotic phenomena, weird anomalies, and hopefully a star that has vanished. Because we know nowadays that if a star dies, it usually explodes in a bright supernova, or it undergoes a very, very slow change that can take billions of years from being into a white dwarf. But the star never, or from what we know, stars do not just vanish. And so this is something we have been looking for a while. Now we have undertaking the mission to look for the stars that vanish in order to know whether it could happen, because there are some physical theories that describe that if you have stars in a certain mass range, they might maybe be able to collapse directly into a black hole. And also it has been hypothesized that vanishing stars could be indicator of extraterrestrial civilizations, which is very exciting for us also to look into. And that is why we are so interested in the stars that vanish. So that is my main project. I have recently also joined a new project led by Avi Loeb called the Galileo Project, which is also related to searches for extraterrestrial technology.
What is it? So you mentioned that disappearing stars, could potentially indicate extraterrestrial life or intelligence. Why would it be that, or what would it be about a disappearing star? Why would that necessarily indicate, one possibility, extraterrestrial life or intelligence?
Well, the thinking behind it has been that it would be a so-called impossible effect, something we know doesn't happen in nature or shouldn't happen in nature. A star is not just going to vanish like that from one day to another. And the idea has simply been that if you have something that looks like magic, maybe is so advanced technology that we cannot separate between magic um, and technology in this case. And so we kind of try to look for these impossible effects.
It is this, from what I understand in my, looking at the VASCO project, it seems like it's a relatively new area of study. Was it always assumed that, like you mentioned at the start, that a star would just, like, stars wouldn't vanish? What was it that led yourself and others to start to look for something that perhaps was considered, impossible for most of kind of astronomy and studying throughout the history?
Well, for me, it was something that a thought that just hit me when I was younger. I was an undergrad student. I was entertaining myself with writing some short stories, and suddenly I kind of hit into the thought, can a star just vanish? And then I started thinking, has anyone ever checked it? Because it's possible. Oh, sorry, my cat is singing.
No worries. I have a cat too. She's what's your cat's name?
Freya. Freya, like the Nordic goddess. Yes. Oh, back to the back to the like main idea. Well, it was just something that hit me while I was um, well, writing the short stories, and then I got very curious. That the idea stayed with me, and I kept thinking year after year, like, can a star vanish? I have to check this. I have to check this, and then it's what has happened. I started checking it once I found the tools, once I found the methods. It took me a few years before I dared to do it. I was on my final year of my PhD studies, and then I did the first pilot study.
And then what are the tools? I have no idea how, like, do you just look up in the sky and count the stars and then look up the next day? Like, what are the actual tools involved in finding a star and then, like, finding the disappearing star kind of thing?
So the first thing that really helped me was a catalog from the 1950s. It's called the U.S. Naval Observatory catalog. Well, the catalog is not from the 1950s. The images are from the 1950s, and then in 2000, someone used all these images from the 50s and constructed reconstructed the positions of the stars and their magnitudes, how bright they were, and I could use this catalog that was based on these 50s images and compare them to catalogs that are done today of the same stars on the same positions. So my goal was to see, is there a star in these old images that was there that isn't there today? It sounds super easy conceptually to check because you think, okay, there's a list of objects here, there's a list of objects there. I thought it would be something fast, but in the end, it turns out to be a super technically difficult project to carry out. So,
And were those Naval Observatory, was that wasn't created with the purpose of looking for disappearing objects? That was just created with the purpose of cataloging. So when you first, you had this idea and then you proceeded to try to find disappearing stars, was there hesitation, at the observatory? Like, when you're explaining what you were doing, was it a new idea for them, or were they just happy to
the
have
only
you?
thing that happened was that whenever I exchanged emails with whoever was responsible, all the mirrors were going down, like mirrors to the websites. At the point, you couldn't enter any of the catalogs from Sweden. So that happened. I found it a bit funny. I think it was just a coincidence or something, or maybe I was too much trying to download too much data at the time, and they said, "Oh, what is happening here? Who is trying to do that?" And it was me who was just trying to get all the data and images too much.
So, these images that you were using were from the 1950s. How do you, when you're searching for a disappearing star, or just how do you confirm? I don't know how exactly they work. Like, confirm that it is something actually in the sky versus human error? I mean, could somebody sneeze on one of them? Like, how do you
Exactly.
do those?
Well, that's a super, super tough one, and that requires a lot of work, and confirming is not so easy. So first one has to reject a lot of causes that one, like anything one can think of. And sometimes you can't reject something. You say, well, this looks real, but we can't know it's real because it could still be that someone, maybe, okay, when it comes to sneezing, I actually checked how sneezing looks under a microscope in an image. And there is not only, they don't look like stars, they have all kind of shapes. Some are elongated, some are rounder. So sneezing, I don't think it can be, but maybe something else could reproduce something that looks very, very, very real. But if one wants to look for a vanishing star, then the best way is to find a star that can be seen in several images on the same spot. Like in the past, you would have, let's say, 2 or 3 images from the 50s, maybe 2 from the 70s, and then nothing today. That is what we hope to find, and we're still looking for it. We haven't found that example yet. But multiple images would be the best way, and so that one can separate it from, let's say, a human error or sneezing or something like that.
How did you get some volunteers and just give them, make them sniff pepper? Or did you just sneeze on a slide? Because that's the fun part of science, right? That nobody ever talks about is how do you test a sneeze under a microscope?
Well, I didn't use a microscope myself, but I looked at the images from microscopes. There are papers where people have shown images like this is how water droplets looks under a microscope, or this is how a sneeze, or not sneezing, let's say saliva looks under a microscope. So that's the easiest, just to look what others have done, and you can see the shapes. They show you the distributions of sizes of the driplets. Yeah.
So going back to the not human error, but the extraterrestrial possibilities behind potentially disappearing stars. So is it that what we think of as stars are some type of extraterrestrial technology, and they're not disappearing, they're just moving to another location that's out of range? Or is it that they are stars but they're being like harvested somehow for energy? Or is there any thoughts as to what the otherworldly explanations could be as to vanishing stars?
Well, the explanations you gave are great, I think. All of them work, like explanations from a science fiction point of view. Another one could be like, let's say, Dyson spheres, that someone has built a Dyson sphere around the star, and these Dyson spheres are like big shells that are harvesting the energy from the star, and eventually it would dim out in the optical and start shining more in the infrared. Another way to watch it would be, let's say that a star isn't actually a star, but it's some type of beacon. And it's there kind of for some time, maybe from some centuries. You have this person who have all the ET, it's time to turn it off for what reason. And the star-like object that was there is no longer there. It's also one of the possibilities.
Whenever I think of Dyson Sphere, all I think about is Star Trek: The Next Generation, because they had a whole episode, I think, where the Enterprise was like trapped in a Dyson Sphere, and that's all I remember from it. But always makes you think back to Star Trek. One question
Star Trek.
You've never seen Star Trek?
No, not a complete episode, only 10 or 15 minutes.
Well, it was growing up, I loved The Next Generation. So, all my scientific knowledge, and it's very little, comes from Star Trek: The Next Generation. So I'm still waiting to be able to travel faster than light. I don't know where warp speed is, but we're supposed to have it by now, I think, according to Star Trek. So start working on that. I'd like to travel faster than light if possible, please.
I can't imagine what motion sickness I would experience in such a faster than light travel.
They seem fine on the TV show. They seem perfectly fine. So I have faith that scientists will be able to to get it done. The the more general question, and I've talked about this with my interviews with Jason Rhodes and researchers from NASA. The one question I always ask is, how do you respond to, some people have the idea that, um, if there's not necessarily a practical application for research per se, it's best to focus on research that you can demonstrate practical results for, and why spend money researching out in the stars when there's problems here on Earth, that type of thing. And I always ask, what is your response to this idea? With people who say, why spend time thinking about or researching, or spend money researching the stars as opposed to whatever problems there might be here on Earth?
Well, I'm thinking that most of the people who sometimes complain on that money goes into this kind of fundamental research, when they go up in the morning, maybe they listen to some music in order to start the day in a good way. Maybe later they watch a movie when they come home in the night, because it's a nice thing to do. Maybe they watch a beautiful painting because they feel good from watching this painting. And maybe they read some popular science magazines simply because they're curious. And I think one of the most fundamental things for us humans is to expand our knowledge, but also to feed ourselves on a spiritual, emotional level, and also to always learn more. And one of the ways how we can do that is through basic research, because all of us like to enjoy the fruits of a project that maybe wasn't very practical. Let's say, like we all love listening to the symphony orchestra that plays the Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, but it's also nothing practical, and still we need it to grow as humans, in my opinion.
And do you think that growing growth as humans, growth as a society, do you think that will be necessary for us to be able to recognize signs of extraterrestrial life, whether it be through work with vanishing stars, or looking for technological signatures like with the Galileo Project? I mean, do you think that right now we'd be capable of recognizing extraterrestrial as signs of extraterrestrial life? I mean, you mentioned that at the start, at a certain point, technology, if it's far enough advanced, can just appear as though it's magic. Could it even be so advanced it's not necessarily detectable to us? Or is that, I suppose, could the ancient civilizations recognize like a jet if we assume they're 2,000 years ahead of us? I suppose they wouldn't know what it is, but they'd recognize it as something not of the natural world.
Well, I personally think that we would, in many cases, we will not be able to recognize ET. I think it would be something so, maybe we would think that it's a natural phenomenon, or we would confuse it with a natural phenomenon, and we would study it like a natural phenomenon. We would assign it some properties that we can explain with some basic astrophysical mechanism. And maybe it would be anything but natural. I think that's, for extremely advanced civilizations, that's the risk we run. So maybe in order for us to recognize a different civilization, they would have to be rather close to us in technological development, I think.
Do you think that increases the risk? Because if you've got a 13 billion year old universe, I think, if I'm getting that correct, or however old it is, that's a lot of time for civilizations to have come before us and to have come after, to be on their way up now. do you think like the likelihood of an alien civilization being relatively close to us technologically, that seems like just another challenge, just because there's so much time for civilizations to come and advance far past us.
That's completely true. And right now, there are not enough good constraints in order to even guess how many civilizations with the same type of development as us are out there. I just know that there are very, very many stars in the universe and many, many galaxies and thus many planets. And I believe that there is a very good likelihood for that to have a lot of civilizations out there. But that's my feeling, and I might be totally wrong, but it's just a guess, a speculation.
It's fun thinking about this type of stuff. I'm a big fan of it. It's fun to think about, some it's fun to consider these questions, right? And I think it goes back to what you said about it's like contemplating great music, or it gives an extra reason to get up and enjoy the day, to think about kind of these really cool and interesting questions. And then you bring the scientific aspect to it, right? You're able to think about these things in a far more scientific way than I am. I just think, what if, Vulcans are flying around or something?
Well, I think all of us are approaching actually the same question that is equally important to all of us. Who am I and why am I here? Searching for it is one way of answering this question. Trying to understand my place in this universe. And I think everyone tries to do it in different ways. An artist will do one way of searching for this question, a priest another way, and an astronomer in a third way, the data-driven way, probably. But maybe many of us are approaching it with the tools we are given.
That's interesting point to bring up. And you're also involved with the Galileo Project, headed by Dr. Avi Loeb. But just and I actually talked about this on an interview I did yesterday on the podcast. It was a scholar from her area of research was the ancient world, Greece, Rome. But it seems like in 2021 in modern society, there's a real there's like rigid lines sometimes between science and art and religion, and it's all kind of, but if you look at the past, I mean, Galileo was a scientist. He was also an artist. He was also, and in the ancient world, there was almost no distinctions between these things. I guess, do you think that, some of these types of questions and type of research, they do lend themselves to obviously their scientific inquiries, but they're also can lend them, to art. They ask religious questions in some cases. I guess just my question is, do you see a benefit of trying to, bring these worlds together, science, art, religion, philosophy, and do you think that they can complement each other as opposed to kind of these divisions?
Absolutely, and I think that these topics should be going together. I myself love playing music. I love playing chamber music. It's one of my big passions. And for me, I always need to do both science and music at the same time in order to be productive. And I know that appears when I don't play music, I'm also not productive in science. I think there's some type of completeness that comes when you pursue different things. And yes, I think that in many ways, I sometimes am wondering, should we really be working 8 hours per day on research? Maybe it's enough with 4 hours per day, and then we should be paid for 4 hours per day doing other things like drawing, playing music, and all the stuff. I think in my ideal utopia, it would be something like that.
And I'm obviously this is only the type of thing that can be guessed at, but if there are civilizations around other stars, to what extent do you think that they would be considering the same type of questions that we are? And are they out there searching for us, especially if they're relatively at the same stage technologically as we are? Or do you think that every civilization will kind of evolve differently and maybe ask different questions, or do you think ultimately we're in this universe where we might all be asking the same type of questions?
I think the latter, that everyone asking the same type of questions. I think it's something fundamental. I bet that even my cat asks that question.
I have a cat. I think she just asks, "Where's my food?" And that's about as far as she is concerned with the universe. Is the food dish full? But yeah, I've always wondered that because the idea of like how other civilizations form and whether we could find them, because I've heard scientists suggest that there'd probably be a great, if there were extraterrestrial life, there'd be a great diversity of life, and it would be it'd probably be very, very diverse in appearance and abilities. But I wonder because, like, ultimately, if the physics presumably are the same throughout the universe, I mean, that seems like it puts some pretty significant constraints on what could evolve successfully. Like, you would need, marine biology, marine life perhaps could evolve on another planet, be intelligent, but it wouldn't be able to build rockets underwater type of thing. I don't know. It just seems that probably most life will follow a similar template to ours, at least intelligent life, I would think.
I'm afraid that I don't have enough knowledge to answer on this question, but I have a feeling of that there are some things that are fundamental all over the universe. And for example, I would say life, the concepts of life and death probably are the same over the whole universe. That would be my guess. So if I would try to communicate with another civilization, I would try to actually use these fundamental concepts rather than anything else.
That's interesting. That's interesting point because from my understanding, when I've seen other or read other books or topics on this idea of communicating with extraterrestrial life, the emphasis always seems to be on math as a fundamental way to communicate. But I like what you said that the idea of not so much communicating with math, but life and death and these more fundamental, I guess, philosophical ideas as a way to communicate with extraterrestrial intelligences. That's something that's really cool. I wonder, they must, like you said, it's hard to imagine a biological life form that doesn't have some understanding of mortality and life and death and what that means.
I think even a robotic life form would have an understanding of it because it has evolved from something once where it existed.
Do you think that?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Do you think that's more likely? That if, for example, whether it be the Vanishing Stars or the Galileo Project, that do you think it'd be more likely that we would discover artificial or robotic signs of intelligence, or do you think it would actually be biological?
I don't know. I'm hoping for biological. I really wouldn't feel comfortable discovering that we are visited by aliens from now and then, and all of them are robotic life forms, and we start feeling a little bit distressed. I don't know why. It's probably my prejudices. I think.
Well, would it be that strikes me as like evidence of some type of great filter. If we're visited by robotic life that was created by biological life that's no longer existing, I mean, what does that say about our chances to exist if
exactly? That's a scary thought.
This has got pretty dark for my podcast talking about, but yeah, it's very one of those things that's fun to talk about. Or could it just be alien junk and trash? I think I listened to a podcast that you were on where you mentioned we could just find the alien version of a Coca-Cola bottle type of thing. Like, and that I think would be the hardest thing to recognize. Is it technological and signs of extraterrestrial intelligence, or is it something natural if it is a discarded piece of alien civilization?
Yes, well, I guess what one would hope for is that if one would find something like that, eventually one should go there and pick up the thing somehow and study it in a laboratory. of course, it's not going to be easy considering how many pieces of the millions of pieces of space debris that are now in orbit around Earth.
How much is there floating around Earth right now?
Millions of the small of centimeter size. It's really sad. And with the Starlink project, it's going to be even worse. So that's why we're going to look in the data from the 1950s. I think that if we find something in the data from 1950s, then we have a good case. It's easier to look in these things where you don't have, or in this old place where you don't have any human contamination yet.
How small can an object be, or how large does an object need to be for us to be able to detect it? You mentioned there's millions of centimeter. Like, could there be, if an alien technology or even human or whatever it is small enough, could it just escape detection for?
If it's small enough, it escapes detection. But I saw actually several papers calculating this, and they were showing that an object that just is as small as 10 centimeters in size, but if it's very reflective of metal or mirror or glass, we are going to see a glimpse in our observations, a very short glimpse of half a second. So if there's an alien Coke bottle, we hope to find it.
Well, you'd hope it'd be bigger than 10 centimeters at the very least. When you are researching like something new or cutting edge, or this new idea of vanishing stars or extraterrestrial technological signatures, like, do you find in some ways it's been helpful to be able to look at things through fresh eyes? And because it can be, I would imagine it can be easy in science and in anything, right, to kind of get trapped by previous orthodoxies as opposed to new ideas and new thoughts. And even something like what was the meteor that was that Dr. Loeb thought might be signs of a alien. There we go. Yeah, like can it be dangerous in science? And this is true for Freemasonry too, or anything, for any organization to get so caught up in orthodoxy, it doesn't always look at new ideas or new possibilities.
Absolutely, and I think that is why I admire so much of the work of Avi, because he breaks these the taboos that are there, and he asks the questions that everyone wants to ask, but nobody dares to. And he points out like important examples, and I think this is very, very important in order to do any type of progress, because I think most scientists are kind of stuck. Even if you would drag ET in front of them and bring ET and let them interview ET, they still wouldn't believe it's ET. So I think that there is this sensation that people simply are, it's called SETI, Searches for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, because I think many are stuck in this thing of that you need to keep searching. It has to be searches in order to be serious. It needs to yield zero results in order to be serious. And I think there is some type of dogma here that serious SETI research should always leads to zero results. And I don't think it's because people do it consciously, but I think it's a subconscious behavior, a fear of finding something, because if you find something and you're wrong, it's embarrassing. Nobody wants to feel embarrassed about being wrong with a result. So there's all this cultural stigma around this.
And so do you think that, because that is definitely a challenge that Freemasonry, I think, is facing. I think almost every organization is facing that. The most famous Masonic quote is, that's not how we did it, is what all the old guys say about the young guys coming through, right? Do you think that in the case of, well, it could be Dr. Loeb, could be anybody, like, do you think that that's a personality thing, or how do you think individuals, if they want to kind of ask the unusual questions or go in unusual ways, or kind of challenge some orthodoxies, like how do you think they go about it? Do you think some people are just naturally more able to do that, or is it a matter of finding the thing you're passionate about? Or I guess what would you say to anybody who wants to maybe explore some new or challenging or unorthodox areas?
Well, I think one needs to be prepared on working alone quite a lot of the time, because once one starts to, this is from my experience, once one starts to work on these things, a lot of, for instance, you might have a supervisor that will tell you, oh, if you're going that direction, everyone, you will lose your credibility. These things are quite common, that someone will say you shouldn't go in that direction, and they will start warning you, like, if you go on in this research, you will later have no job. People always like scaring you. So the question is, how passionate are you about the topic? Because if your goal is to become professor, maybe that is not a very good thing to do to challenge orthodoxy. However, if you're so curious that it wins over everything else, then you will go on in that direction, even if you get a lot of setbacks coming from your colleagues and friends, because maybe you believe that this is important and you will continue in that direction, simply because you feel that this is an important question and I'm curious and I need to answer that. So I think this is a very individual thing. It depends on the type of personality one has and how curious one is, how long one can endure also this social isolation that might come with it.
And then if do you think that, the first person kind of out the gate is always the one who takes a lot of the attacks and the blows, but over time of doing this research, and even if it does start out alone, it does seem like if the person knows what they're talking about, and if they have some successes, or they're able to bring more and more people on board over time. I mean, you're seeing that with a lot of these questions now that 20 years ago were considered unorthodox, that are now gaining more mainstream attention and mainstream traction, and mainstream even funding.
I think that SETI and UFO research, two very different things, but both of these things are going to become mainstream in 10 years. I think it just needs time, and you need more like inspiring figures like Avi, who dare to do this step and challenge the society, because others will follow, simply because it helped me to see like the wonderful work that is being done by other people in order to dare to do SETI research myself. Like, I needed this little push in the beginning, and then I got into SETI. I dared to. So yeah.
And then maybe the next group coming up, we'll see you, and then that you'll be the push for the next group to come through, and the next group to come through, right? I think that's the hope with, I think, almost anything, is the first person, somebody takes a risk, but other people follow behind when they see that it's as you said. And that's the thing too, like, passion is such a strong motivator, not just for the initial person doing it, but for those come behind. Like, you can tell with yourself, right? Your passion for exploring these questions about, can a star vanish, right? I don't know how many people asked that question before you, but I'm sure many people are asking it after you. I never even would have thought of the question before seeing some of your work. So yeah, I think that passion is such an important part of it. The more passionate you are about something, the more people will be drawn to it.
I think one more thing that could help, just like in order to make it easier, would be if one actually, nowadays it's very common that many astronomers, professional astronomers, spend a lot of time on, let's say, Facebook and Twitter. And I think these two, like these social media, have a tendency of clustering opinions and clustering certain opinions and making them seem overrepresented relative to what they actually are. And I think sometimes it would probably make a more free environment if we would have less science on social media, I think. I think the social medias have a tendency of creating some type of orthodoxy in thinking. And I don't think it's a good and beneficial thing. So I hope this is something that we will be able to move away from, like, over time.
Do you think that that's the current applications or the medium itself? Like, do you think that there's, because I agree with you, I think social media, there's a lot of problems with people forming their own little towers and little groups, and not seeing a lot of communication between those groups over time. Do you think that it's possible for social media to solve those problems, or do you think just the nature of the medium is those problems will always exist? Because I struggle with that with the podcast and with Freemasonry is you want to promote it on social media, but you don't then want to get pigeonholed into one specific group that you can't kind of break out of.
I think that the problem of social media nowadays is they are like they are too wild. There are no rules. People can write any type of attacks on other. They can do any type of attacks on other individuals. You can write nasty things. In reality, you cannot go to your colleague and punch them in the face or something. But on social media, they all do these things. And unless we regulate social media with really, really strong rules and how in behavior, we are going to keep having that problem. And I think it's bad thing for science that we have them. So I really hope that social media will, or that there will be many more rules and restrictions and regulations of social media 10 years in the future in order to avoid all this mob behavior that can be stalling certain scientific progress.
I agree completely with that. For anybody who is interested in learning more about your work, where can they find more about your projects and what you're working on, and any of your findings, all that good stuff?
We have a web page with the VASCO project. It's not super updated. It's called VASCO site. Let me send you the link. We also have a citizen science project that I wish I would be able to tell more about it. Citizen science project that we do together with amateur astronomy associations, researchers and students in Nigeria, Algeria, and Cameroon, where we are working on finding ET together. So I think this is the first and only SETI project done with African countries.
That's very cool.
So I hope that even if we fail with our scientific goal, I hope that VASCO will be able to inspire many youngsters into astronomy, especially in countries that are not so economically privileged. So the hope is to bring some of the SETI research to them and bring them my dream about finding ET.
And I think that's a great place to leave it. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Truly appreciate it. And I wish you the best of luck. And, if you do find ET, hopefully we can be back on the podcast to talk about it. But even if not, I'm sure you're absolutely right. I'm sure that the work is inspiring many people to follow their own passions, whatever they may be, but definitely astronomy, and asking some of these questions that are unorthodox but important. So thank you so much for being here.
See you. Thank you.